All right, if you guys would come on in, we're going to go ahead and get started with our panel discussion. My name is Terry Ricks, and I'm so excited to be able to be with you today with this amazing panel. We have 2 breakout sessions going on right now, so welcome to the one that is about housing and insurance. We're happy to have you here. So, the session is approved for CLE, and for those of you who need them, it makes a big difference. So make sure that you get your information from your CLE form at check-in. Planners, landscape architects, and lead professionals may also receive credit. Please see the continuing education table in the foyer for information. Thank you to the session sponsor, AARP, and all summit sponsors who are listed in your program and in the slideshows between sessions. The summit would not be possible without their support. So, I'm Terry Ricks. It's an honor to be with you all and to be a part of this very important discussion. I'm a current PhD student at Louisiana State University studying poverty-related competencies in LSU's School of Leadership and Human Resource Development. I am an attorney, the former general counsel for the Louisiana Housing Corporation, and the former secretary of the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services under Governor John Bel Edwards. It's amazing to be able to be seated among this panel today to talk about something that is a most basic need and right for all of us, and that is housing and how it is impacted by insurance. And so, we're going to get started with our panels. Let me introduce you to them. Danielle Aragoni is an urban planner and community resilience expert. She currently serves as Managing Director for Policy and Solutions at National Housing Trust and is the author of the book Climate Resilience for an Aging Nation, which explores the impacts of climate change on people over 65 and the need for community-scale solutions to reduce risk for all. Kathy Laborde, President and CEO of Gulf Coast Housing Partnership. Over the course of her career, Ms. Laborde has developed more than 7,000 affordable and market-rate homes, as well as commercial and community facilities, both directly and in partnership with local nonprofits, municipal government, state government, and the private sector. Asia Agnabeen is an organizer at Together New Orleans and works as the disaster response lead on its Community Lighthouse Project, which has a goal of building a network of 85 congregations and community institutions across New Orleans with commercial-scale solar power to serve as resiliency hubs during power outages and natural disasters. Lastly, and certainly not leastly, is Carolyn Kowski. She is the Associate Vice President for Economics and Policy at Environmental Defense Fund and the author of the book Understanding Disaster Insurance, New Tools for a More Resilient Future. She is the editor of the book, A Blueprint for Coastal Adaptation. Let's get ready for a discussion that matters to everyone. We will start with the panelists' presentations that will review national trends and pressures, then move to some examples and best practices in developing affordable, resilient housing solutions. Then we will be enlightened about one local effort, an important resilience project in New Orleans, and an important presentation about insurance. These experts have only 10 minutes. It's kind of hard to boil this down to make some highlights, and then we'll have a moderated discussion and hopefully some audience Q&A if we have some time left. Would you all please join me in welcoming all our presenters? We will start, though, with Ms. Danielle.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. One thing I'll add to my bio is that I did used to work for AARP, so I'm especially happy that they are the sponsor for this session, coincidentally, so I'm a big fan of AARP. But we're here today really to talk about, sort of pretty big issues confronting Louisiana and our country, frankly. I find it interesting that this session is called Living on the Edge. It certainly pertains to climate change. I'd also argue that we're sort of living on the edge of a housing crisis, if not already immersed in one, particularly when you think about the demographic trends that are underway. So we'll talk all about that quickly, given the amount of time. But again, thanks to CPEX for the invitation, for having me. First, I want to introduce briefly the organization I work for, National Housing Trust. We're a national nonprofit. We're an affordable housing owner and developer ourselves, as well as a policy shop. We lend for affordable housing projects across the country, and we also support affordable housing providers to integrate renewable energy into their properties. And of course, we serve the residents, the 4,000 residents of our 4,000 plus units who call our units home. So really, we are confronting this affordable housing crisis. I know you all feel it here in Louisiana. We certainly see it nationwide. We're somewhere between 5.5 and 7 million units short of where we need to be in terms of the overall affordable housing supply for our country. And that really is playing out everywhere. It's not just in affordable housing, however, that we have shortages. Even market rate housing is really increasingly under duress. And what we see in the image here is the result of the study done by National Low Income Housing Coalition that nowhere in the US can someone who's earning minimum wage afford a market rate 2-bedroom home. So we really have this sort of unsustainable housing model currently. I will often, and you'll see throughout the talk, kind of hone in on what that means for older adults and what that means for climate impacts. We are at our highest level ever, according to Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, of the rate of older adults who are experiencing housing cost burden, paying more than 30% of their income on housing. That goes for renters, where about 50% of older-headed renter households are paying that amount of money for their rent. So not unlike that for older homeowners. About 1 in 4 older-headed homeowners are paying more than 30% of their income for housing. So this really is a kind of an endemic problem. We know that there are not enough public resources that exist to address this problem. Vouchers are consistently oversubscribed. Low-income housing tax credits are routinely kind of hitting up against their bond caps. It is a crisis in terms of the financial resources to build these units. And on top of that, we see rising building costs. The National Association of Realtors indicated that costs have gone up something like 40% in a several-year span. So this really is a crisis upon a crisis. Let's add to that list. We also know that there's increasing prices with regards to utilities and insurance, which we'll hear a little bit more about shortly. And on top of all that, climate change really threatens our existing housing stock. So as if we weren't already kind of under the gun to produce more housing, we're actually losing housing. And I'll quote someone who I know from Louisiana Housing Corporation, who have repeated his statistic many times, Todd Folsey, who said that Louisiana Housing Corporation lost 20% of their affordable housing stock in 10 years due to disasters, which I think is just remarkable. And we all know how, many of us know, and I know Kathy knows, how hard it is to develop affordable housing. So when you think about that kind of staggering loss, it's pretty incredible. Of course, the most visible evidence of all of this is really what we see in terms of the people who are unhoused in our communities, where we do have this true crisis. Highest levels of unhoused population. Increasingly, those are comprised of older adults as well. About half of the unhoused population, as of the most recent point count, are over 50. And the reason that I'm pointing out the sort of ties to older adults is because we are experiencing this kind of massive trend. There are these two big changes happening underway. We obviously are seeing the impacts of climate change. We're also perhaps less evidently seeing what is coming in terms of a demographic shift, a real demographic tipping point that we're all beginning to bear out in our communities. I won't spend a lot of time on the growing climate risk. I know here in Louisiana, you all know this better than anyone. 2023 was the most billion-dollar disasters recorded by NOAA, who tracks these events. To the point of our previous speaker, there are some skeptics out there, but these numbers are hard to deny. One of the things I think that is perhaps less evident is, again, this demographic shift that is underway. We're in the middle of a pretty massive shift. The fastest growing segment of our population is older adults. 100 years ago, 1 in 20 people was over 65. Today, it's more like 1 in 6, and soon it will be 1 in 5. Moreover, by 2034, just 10 years from now, we'll have more people over 65 than under 18 for the first time ever. And that really calls for some different considerations when we think about communities and how they plan for older adults' needs. That matters a lot because when we think about this growing segment of our population, I think it's fair to say there's kind of a poor understanding of who older adults are generally. In part, that's because we don't have a great definition for when you begin to be an older adult. Is it 50 or 55 or 62 or 65? Lots of different markers in time that can sort of suggest that transition. But there are some broad characteristics that need to be considered when we think about how these risks and the realities of being an older adult intersect with our climate changes. And you all can read for yourselves, so I won't go through these, but a lot of local leaders don't necessarily understand what the realities are of the older adult cohort as a whole. Of course, there's lots of variations within that. So there's lots of people who break the mold of aging, lots of people who maybe exemplify the most extreme of all these conditions themselves. But these are the realities for a growing segment of our community. So when you think about those changes, the climate changes we talked about, and the sort of demographic changes that are underway, and you layer on top of that this housing crisis that we've just described, the thing that I want you to take away from this slide is that we have different professions working on all of these challenges. Folks working on the climate side of things come out of the engineering world and the climatology world, and they're often called chief resilience officers, whereas folks who are thinking about our aging nation sit in different parts of the government, sit in different parts of agencies, or sit outside government altogether. They're the gerontologists, the aging advocates, the healthcare professionals. And again, the housing crisis, there's lots of planners in the room here. Planners kind of sit at the confluence of these things, but the reality is that there's not enough understanding about how these two things intersect. I'm getting the 2-minute side, so I'm going to really blast through these few things. We see lots of evidence of how our communities do not consider the needs of older adults right now. That's reflected both in our housing stock that isn't enough, there aren't enough units that are accessible, public spaces that don't provide enough shading and seating, similarly for our public transit systems. But really where you see the impacts of this lack of consideration are in disasters. And this is really the sort of ethos or the catalyst, I guess, for the book that I read that maybe we can talk more about. Time after time, you see disasters take the lives of older adults at a far higher rate than than other ages. And that is the case over 20 years. We have not really delivered any significant change in any way. This is a trend that continues, and it's one that's going to continue unless we commit to a different outcome. I think there was a session this morning on heat that I unfortunately missed, but I hope that this statistic was shared. Older adults are disproportionately impacted by heat. 12,000 people die each year as a result of heat-related illnesses, and of those, 80% are people over 60. This is just one of the ways in which our new climate normal is differently impacting older adults. It's not just in health regards, though. We know, again, you think about those housing conditions that I described at the top, the very real financial effects of climate change as related to utilities and insurance are layered on top of the financial challenges that older adults already face to remain stably housed. Already, 7 million, actually 10 million people over 60 struggle to afford utilities and are utility insecure. And of the 7 million reported that they went without food or medical provisions for a month in order to pay their utility bills. This is untenable, it's unsustainable, it's dangerous. On top of that, what you'll hear a lot more about from Caroline is the insurance implications. As we develop more risk-informed maps, insurance premiums are going higher, if they're available at all. In many states, insurers are leaving, which leaves older adults who may own their homes really left high and dry if they can't sell their properties because there is no insurance available to the next buyer. I do have a stop sign here in front of me. We could talk a little bit more about how you actually build housing that takes sustainability into account. These are some properties from our own portfolio. And then we can talk maybe more about the book where we talk about some solutions, which I know you'll hear from my fellow panelists here. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Kathy Laborde, and I'm the President and CEO of Gulf Coast Housing Partnership, GCHP. We are based in New Orleans, and we work along the Gulf Coast. We're in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and Houston, so we sure know about the insurance crisis, okay? And we absolutely use real estate to change the environment. One of the things that we have learned over time, and frankly, even before the insurance crisis hit us, and I will absolutely say, and I owe this a lot to outside funders, Enterprise, Louisiana Housing Corp., who incorporated some building standards really after Katrina. They encouraged builders to build better, building codes changed, and so I think really after Katrina, the building world changed for us here and gave us a little bit of a head start, okay, to what we are anticipating now. And so from GCHP's perspective, it's very, very important, okay, that we build resiliently. And quite frankly, folks, I don't know who is going to solve this insurance problem for us or when it will happen. But what people, I think, really need to understand is you've really got to fortify your house. I'm using that word, but you can do it in many different ways and means, which we have learned, so that you can withstand, and in a way, you know, you're blinking with the insurance companies, right? So if you have a home that can withstand a storm, you may have some damage, but you can still live in it while you're fighting the insurance company. And that's really, really important to our communities. If anybody's noticed, people are leaving the state. And we have got to be able to suffer through a disaster, get people home, and rebuild quickly. How do you do that? We talked about interest rates are sky high. They're not really sky high, but they're sky high for us, right? Interest rates could get a lot higher, but they're higher than all the financial models that we know how to deal with, right? Insurance is a crisis, and then building costs have gone up. Building costs have gone up a lot, depending upon what market you're working in. We do build to certain third-party standards. Fortified, we absolutely incorporate. Either we go for a fortified standard, or we have learned what components actually matter, and those are the things that we incorporate. So I would encourage you just to learn about them. You don't have to do them all, but you can certainly do ones that have major impacts. This, I'm told, has become the poster child for Fortified. This is a transaction that we finished like 3 days before Ida hit. This storm went directly, the storm went directly over this transaction. What you see there is what it looked like the day after. It wasn't just about the bricks and mortar, it's also about the infrastructure, et cetera. We're certainly willing to share this information with you. And this was, frankly, it was a pilot demonstration project done by the state, funded by the federal government, and it clearly demonstrated that there are certain ways that you can mitigate and get your community folks back into their communities immediately after an event occurs. However, you can see on the one hand, you're like, okay, we'll build better. There's really no reward right now for building better in terms of your insurance premium. Unfortunately, and it's rather perverse, right? Because to build better costs more. We're required to total insured value covered. That's 100% replacement costs. We didn't lose anything, zero on that Lockport deal, but we're insuring it for 100% replacement cost. It's unsustainable, folks, okay? So while we're busy, and what I think people don't necessarily understand is the federal government doesn't regulate insurers. The federal government is only in the flood insurance business. So it really is up to the states to create an environment that, and I know they are the bad guys to a lot of us, but we have to have insurance companies to insure us, okay? And we need to be treated fairly as citizens of the state. You can see what's happened, though. The construction cost when we built this, we finished, you can see, what's the end of mid-2021, $176,000 a unit. We could not build that today for $176,000. It'd be over $200,000. But look at our insurance premiums, right? These are per unit, per door is typically what you're going to hear. We budgeted $1,668, placed in service $1,740, came up for renewal, we're almost $3,000 a door. Okay, it's only 35 units. Okay, you can't not cover your insurance premium. So what do you then give up? Right? You have to have employees. You have to cut the grass. but maybe the other things aren't, you just can't fund them anymore. So you can understand that this is not sustainable. So what do we do in the interim? Okay, as I showed you and told you, we're building better. That's, I hate to be that simplistic about it, but that's the only advice I have to give you. This project is in Baton Rouge, Lotus Village. We did with Council on Aging. It addresses directly senior citizens. Okay, so where did we build it? We built it next to a senior citizen center and a health clinic. Okay, and how did we build it? Okay, you can see the resilient features that are embedded in it, and then you can see the cost of doing it. And this was 116 units. We finished this maybe a year and a half ago, or a year ago. So it's relatively recent information. Country Ridge, this one is in Opelousas, okay? And this is 32 units. We did fortified style roofing, saying that we understand the components of fortified that have to be there, and we put hurricane shutters on this one. Okay, you can see the cost. This is also this is interesting because this is actually an historic rehab. And so it's interesting in that there are some roofs that were technically already fortified. It's a metal roof, so we left them, right? But where we didn't have that feature, we added the fortified roofs, and you can see what else we did. Anything that we could do that the National Park Service would, okay. And this is a recent deal. We just actually moving in our last tenants as we speak. This is in New Orleans on Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard. And this one is built to this is not a building standard in terms of resiliency, but we built this to a Fitwell standard. Okay, we have this in the project we did in Jackson. Both include medical clinics on site. Okay, so we wanted to surround the clinic with a healthy building. Along with, then, you can see the resiliency features that we embedded into the transaction. This is 192 units total. It was not inexpensive. And you can see almost $85 million. Okay, this one had the double whammy of not only the insurance crisis, but first we had to deal with COVID. So the moral of the story, folks, is all we can do right now is invest in what you're building, build better, okay, and help all of us, all the citizens, understand what it takes to keep insurers here and what it takes you as citizens to be treated fairly by them. And I'll leave it at that. You're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Asia Ognaveen. I'm an organizer with Together New Orleans and seeing out the disaster response efforts on our Community Lighthouse project. So Together New Orleans is a broad-based organization made up of organizations. So it's mostly churches, synagogues, mosques, but we also have unions, other civic nonprofits, and things like that. And we are a part of a statewide network, which is known as Together Louisiana. So we have sister organizations in the North Louisiana Interfaith, Delta Interfaith. In Alexandria, there's Central Louisiana Interfaith, and then the Baton Rouge area West Side Sponsoring Committee, Together Baton Rouge, and then us, Together New Orleans. And each of us are similar organizations, broad-based organizations made up of other nonprofits. So Together New Orleans got our official start in July of 2021. We had a culminating assembly with members and leaders of clergy all over the city to state that together we are the new we. That was July 2021. A month later, August 2021, Hurricane Ida hit South Louisiana and wipes all of us across the map. New Orleans did not get hit like, say, the river parishes did or the Gulf South, but we still lost power for 2+ weeks. So Together New Orleans organizers and leaders got on a Zoom call just to check on each other. Say, how are you doing? How is your family? How is your church? And to say that those leaders were furious is a huge understatement. One, Hurricane Ida didn't even hit New Orleans, but we still are knocked off the grid. Two, We are not strangers to hurricanes in South Louisiana. So why does this keep happening? Why is it a hurricane can pass next to us and we still lose power with no indication of when it's going to come back on? We had one pastor who was contacted by his city council member to ask, hey, can we set up a cooling site and give out water at your church? He would love to do that, but he can't because there's no power. There's no power at his church. There's no power at his home. He has no idea what he's going to do next. So the conversation shifted from why does this keep happening and what are they going to do about it to, okay, what can we do about it? So we initiated the Community Lighthouse Project. And our findings for developing the Lighthouse Project, which is outfitting solar panels and backup battery storage to community institutions, we learned that Hurricane Ida killed 23 people just in New Orleans, which was more than the rest of the state. Of those 23 people, 21 of them died from just the power outage alone. So that is carbon monoxide poisoning and heat exhaustion. Power outages are now the leading cause of deaths and disaster in the U.S. Gulf South. This graphic from Scientific American shows that the Gulf South experiences more power outages lasting more than 8 hours than most places in the rest of the country. What that says is, you know, there's storm damage, there's flooding, there's hurricanes, but heat is killing people. So the idea behind the Lighthouse Project is let's have a place for people to go to where they can cool off, get some water, get some ice, contact relatives by having a spot to charge their phone. So in July of 2022, we had a culminating assembly and ratified the Community Lighthouse Project. This is a article from the Times-Picayune showing the U.S. Secretary of Energy coming down to one of our community lighthouse projects to check it out, see what it's all about, and give her approval. We have 10 sites complete now throughout New Orleans and the river parishes with a implementation scale of going 500 across the state. So that would be 46 megawatt hours of energy, 63 megawatt hours of energy, saving 32,000 pounds of carbon per year. The community lighthouse projects offer food and water, charging stations, portable battery exchanges so folks can pick up a portable battery, charge their device, contact their relatives, bring it back and pick up a new battery, and then a spot to cool off and get some relief from the heat. Now, we wish that was all that was needed for a successful and safe environment. That's not all we learned. So in the book Heat Wave by Eric Kleinberg, he touches on the heat wave that hit Chicago in the late 90s that devastated the area. The focus of his area is two neighborhoods, Englewood and Auburn Green. Both similar demographics, very close geographically, as you can see. Population about the same, under 60,000, both 99% Black, and both unemployment rates under 10%. Both experiencing the heat wave the exact same. The difference is Auburn Gresham had 3 deaths per 100,000. Englewood had 33 deaths per 100,000, 10 times higher. Why is that? Their social structure was different. Auburn Gresham had their churches, clubs, businesses open. They were invested in their housing, and there was a social infrastructure made up of trust. Neighbors checked on neighbors. Unfortunately, Englewood lived in isolation. Their social buildings were closed, their housing was boarded up, and they lived in fear of one another. All of that to say is isolation kills. So in the Community Lighthouse Project, it's not just about providing a resilience hub in neighborhoods for heat relief, It's expanding the network, it's building the infrastructure, and it's also training teams to combat that isolation. That's part of the Lighthouse's block-by-block model. So each lighthouse will have a canvassing team that goes out, meets their neighbors, and introduces themselves as a community lighthouse, but one gets to know their neighbors. They'll canvass their neighborhood and their turf, which is just a geographic area around their lighthouse that they will be responsible for meeting each neighbor, knowing their names, and knowing what fears or what kind of disabilities they might have during a disaster. For example, this is Broadmoor Community Church, one of our first lighthouses, and this is their demographic that they will actually be covering this coming Saturday. They're going on a neighborhood walk to canvass this area and meet each of their neighbors and ask them questions about, what was their experiences in previous power outages? What are their concerns during a power outage? Is it water, is it ice, or is it something more serious? And then, in the result of that, neighbors know each other. The organization is connected back to its neighborhood, and they are invited to a open house where neighbors can actually come see the church and the community lighthouse and know that they are a part of a community. First Grace, another one of our community lighthouses, also embarked on a walk. This is their canvassing team. So as you can see, we canvass on blue sky days in the technical term, but the literal term, we canvass during downpour. We canvass to meet our neighbors, and it's a good way for everybody else to learn about what else is going on in the city. Is it drainage? Is it, garbage pickup, things like that. So the community lighthouse is a model for green development, resiliency, but it's also an anti-isolation model. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. So I'm going to wrap us up and say a little bit more about this issue of how climate change and insurance markets are not working so well together right now and what that means for residents and housing. I want to start by saying a little bit about the role of insurance in recovery. So as we all know, the costs of climate-related disasters have just been increasing. They're going to continue increasing. And these events are really costly for households. We see that right after a disaster occurs, there are a number of expenditures. Yes, there's the very visible and severe property damage and the need to repair and replace, but we also see that there's lots of non-property costs as well that households have to deal with. The coping strategies for when services are out, like power, having to pay for temporary lodging, the evacuation expenses, and so on. We also find in survey work of households impacted by major hurricanes that up to half of households face declines in income due to business interruption, businesses that had to shut down because of the disaster, at the same time that they faced the spike in expenses. So it's this double negative financial impact for a household. So how do people cope with that? There's essentially 4 big buckets of money that people could turn to. The first is their own savings, and we see people do drain their savings to recover from a disaster. We also know that the overwhelming majority of Americans do not have close to enough liquid savings to cover the huge costs that disasters impose. The first line of defense from our government after a disaster is actually loans to people, and post-disaster loans can be a really important and helpful source of recovery, but we also see when we look at that data that as incomes go down, loan denials go way up. And that's because households don't meet the debt to income and credit score requirements. And so there's a whole segment of the population that are just locked out of access to credit post-disaster, and others for whom taking on additional debt at the time of a disaster would just be incredibly financially burdensome. The third is federal assistance, and there are still too many households who pre-disaster think that our government comes in and makes people whole again. And I'm sure residents of Louisiana, maybe more than elsewhere in the country, know that's not true, and that households typically only get a few $1,000s, and lots of federal dollars can take a very, very long time to get into people's hands. So the limitations with those first three is why insurance becomes so important after a disaster, and why we see this growing body of research that finds that households with insurance do better post-disaster. They're more likely to rebuild. They have fewer financial burdens. They have fewer unaddressed needs. We see in some nice research after Hurricane Harvey that lack of insurance can widen inequality after the disaster. We also have some new work showing that as more households in a community have disaster insurance, there's positive economic spillovers for the community. Visitations to local businesses increase. So, which is all very intuitive. Insurance gives you money at the time you need it, and that can help you recover and get the economy kick-started again. So despite these really important financial benefits that insurance provides both to households and to communities, we're at this moment where those financial benefits are becoming more and more important, because as disasters increase, more and more households are unfortunately having to learn what it means to suffer through them, and they need that financial protection. Yet those same trends that are driving up the need for insurance are also breaking our insurance markets at the same time. So as everyone in Louisiana knows, this is creating some really troubling impacts in insurance markets. There's 4 big trends right now that are not just Louisiana, but lots of other states are facing this crisis as well. The first is insolvencies. 12 firms in Louisiana have gone under the last few years. The second is increasing prices. And here, there's unfortunately a little bit of a perfect storm. Property insurance prices are up everywhere nationwide because the costs of rebuilding have gone up. And part of that is because of our prior high inflationary environment, supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, all of which made it more expensive to rebuild, and insurance is reflecting that. But in areas of high climate risk, where climate-related perils are increasing, the cost of insurance are going up even more, as we see here in southern Louisiana. We're also seeing insurers, as this risk is going up, simply abandon markets. Some of these are very high profile headlines where big name companies are leaving entire states, but we're also seeing insurance companies start to slowly pull back, stop writing in this disaster-prone zip code, for example, or put in place restrictions on writing near the coast or in certain wildfire areas we're seeing in California. We're also seeing that homeowners insurance policies are starting to cover less than they used to, with more sublimits and sublimits that are more restrictive, meaning even if you insure to the full value of your home, if your losses from certain types of things, the insurance company won't pay the full costs. So what do these 3 things mean? They mean that more and more people are moving into public sector insurance programs. So Louisiana has Louisiana Citizens, but there's public sector programs in every disaster-prone state, and we're seeing a lot of them, like here, are increasing as people can't find coverage or affordable coverage in the private market. Now, of course, all of this is about wind. It's about homeowners, the private market. We know you can't buy hurricane insurance. You have to have your homeowner's wind policy and the flood policy. And unfortunately, lots of folks are seeing increases in their flood insurance. At the same time, they're seeing these crises in the private market. Right now, about 1/4 of single family homes in Louisiana are paying more than $1,000 a year for their flood insurance. You can see there's a lot of heterogeneity, though, across the state for that. And recently, the federal program changed the way it prices policies in something called Risk Rating 2.0, and that was to better align risk with prices. In some places, it was charging people too much. In some places, like southern Louisiana, it had been charging people too little. What does that mean? Prices are going up, and there's a congressional cap at 18% per year, but 18% a year starts to really get high, and you can see that FEMA has released data showing that across southern Louisiana, flood insurance full risk costs on average could get up to $5,000, $6,000 a year, which is around a 500% increase for lots of people. So we have this big problem of affordability, of availability. What can we do? And I see sort of 2 overlapping problems right now. The first has to do with equity and inclusivity in our markets. And I know you probably can't read through all of that, but EDF has recently done some work on how to create a more inclusive disaster insurance market. And it's going to take a suite of approaches. It's going to take public policy change at the federal or state level. So things like the proposal in Congress to create a means-tested assistance program for flood insurance. It's going to take regulatory reforms at a state level, because insurance, yes, is regulated at a state level, in order to make markets more transparent, to make the claims process more fair. And it's also going to take changes in the private market. We are also doing some work on innovations in the types of insurance offered and the way insurance is offered that could potentially help solve and fill holes in our safety net. But fundamentally, as you've already heard, stabilizing insurance markets requires lowering the risk, because the insurance isn't going to get easier or cheaper unless we lower the risk. So that links to all the topics here, right, of how we build, where we build, how people understand and communicate about the risk. And we've also been doing some thinking about how the insurance sector can support that more, to support stronger rebuilding after a storm and reward stronger building ahead of time. And with that, I will end and turn it back over to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Well, a big thank you to each of you for the things that you have brought forward today. And one of the things I would consistently talk about when we were gathering as decision makers when I worked in government was that no matter what we were talking about, the end of it is that we were talking about people. We don't build houses just to build houses. We don't build roads to build roads. We build those things for people. And I was taking a look at, the goal of this session, the summit, as stated by Camille, is a Louisiana where every community has the chance to flourish. And so as you guys were thinking and talking, I bet everybody here was thinking also. And so let me see from the audience, like if there was something that someone said here that was new to you, could you raise your hand? Just raise your hand. Anything new? Find out something new. I know the other thing that happens to us whenever we're listening is that sometimes we go, oh, I didn't know that. And the first thing you think about is how does it impact you? Because you can see yourself in all these things, like how's insurance is going up. But then also I was so impacted by when we started thinking about our elders, right? How many of you know that our elders are now taking care of our children? How many of you know that, right? And so when we're talking about these things, we're really talking about every sector of Louisiana, not just those of us who are concerned about prices going up, but those of us who are really unhoused or just on the brink of being unhoused. And so this really is about every person in Louisiana, and it's not a natural thing for us to think about others. And so while we all sit here and think about this new information that we got, what we really want to do is to make sure that we're all thinking about the least of these, and that means all sectors. And you get a beautiful job of showing the need, how the money is just really exorbitant right now. Those of us who are in the game to make a change and put those housing, affordable housing out there are just running into a lot of things. And then I love this opportunity to see all of the work that's being done in a community by the people in the community. Beautiful, right? And so there is such a thing as the science of hope. And I appreciate it so much that we were having right before this, looking at, the neuro. And I said, anything that starts with neuro is like, it's going to be over my head, but I got it, right? It's hard to change. And sometimes it's hard for us to get out of our middle class lens to really see what's going on in the sectors that have been marginalized for a very long time. And so what I thought, as each of you listened to one another, what questions did you have for your colleagues? And why don't I start with you?
Well, first I want to say I learned so much from all of you. When I was writing the book, Climate Resilience for an Aging Nation, I was very lucky, first of all, to feature Maison Lafourche. I always get the name wrong, Maison. Kathy, you have to help me. Maison de Bayou Lafourche. Okay, close enough. I'm not from here, obviously. Californian. Sorry. To feature that project in my book, because it really is such a great example, and then to hear Asia talk about Project Lighthouse. Asia was probably the last person I interviewed for the book, so I feel like this is a real first full circle moment to be with her today, because her story, to me, is the absolute encapsulation of all of this. It's about understanding who is at risk in the face of our climate future, thinking about what is the system around them that we need to build to augment and offset their risk. In this case, it was power in the case of Louisiana. In other places, it may be something different. And then to come together as a community to really think about what does it mean to create that resilience for them as well as for the community as a whole. So I continually am inspired by that project, and I talk about it as much as I can. So I guess my question for Asia, I'll stick with Asia, is, how have you seen the people that you serve, older adults who you serve, because I do think that you showed a picture of a lot of the folks who died in Hurricane Ida. I think they're overwhelmingly older adults. You talked about isolation. Have you seen their, point of view or perspective change about climate and climate resilience through your work? And if so, what can that teach us about engaging older adults in climate resilience discussions in our own communities?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think in discussion and kind of socializing the project, we have seen folks kind of go from despair to a glimmer of hope in the project, and that, okay, we don't have to accept dying alone in the heat after every hurricane. There is opportunity to see something different. And part of that hope is that it's not us waiting on any magical force to come down and bring solar panels. It's like each person can take autonomy and direction and own this project. So especially, as we do the neighborhood walks, we kind of see like folks kind of shy away from opening their doors and answering to strangers, to hearing, oh, we have solar panels on our church, you're welcome to come by. Like, okay, the space for vulnerability has been opened, and I feel okay talking about my experiences. And I'm okay with that because I know that there's steps being taken to address that, and I'm not alone in that. So, in some cases it's great, I would be the perfect recipient of a lighthouse. And then in others, it's like, I want to be a part of that. I don't want to, feel despair and disdain about what's going on. I want to be a part of it. And so some of the lighthouses have acquired like small volunteer teams through this, and a lot of them are older adults.
Very good, Asia. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I actually have a question for Caroline. Hearing about the insurance kind of like brings me back from this community model, and that we're not living in a bubble. We are part of a system, and while we'd like to like just have insurance rates drop dramatically and everything be all great, there are real world systems in place. So I'm wondering, from the mindset of our leaders and our community lighthouse teams in our neighborhoods, are there actions that neighbors and ordinary residents can take to address their concerns around rising insurance rates or being dropped from insurance? Are there like some concrete steps that, they don't have to live in that despair?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think there's a number of different types of solutions that we could start thinking about. The first, as Kathy was talking about, and I'm going to have a follow-up question for her on this, I don't think we can financially engineer our way out of the insurance crisis. It has to come back to lowering our risk. So it has to come back to those choices about building stronger and safer. So that's a first one. But we also often see a lot of procedural inequity in insurance markets, where policyholders might not be getting fair treatment on their claims. It might take a really long time. There's a lot of contention, and there are regulatory changes we can make to help make some of those processes easier and more equitable to get people the payments they need. But one challenge is that the CEO of a new insurtech startup, well, they're not that new anymore, but noticed that there's this really perverse financial incentive at the heart of all of insurance, which is that at the moment you want insurance to be paying you, to be giving you money, every dollar they pay you is a dollar less profit for them. And so there's actually now some interesting new models to undo some of that perverse financial incentive. So one is this company I mentioned, and they've created a model where you pay your premium and you pick a charity that matters to you. And the company takes a fixed amount of money to operate, to buy their reinsurance. And if there's any money left over at the end of the year that hasn't gone to paying claims, it goes to the charity. So there's no incentive for them not to pay you because they'll be donating it anyway. So there are these new kind of innovative ways of thinking, and some of them could be rooted in in communities. So, but building off that, can I now ask Kathy a question, which is, I feel like the solution that makes the most sense to me is that we have to build stronger. And you seem to be doing that in many ways and places, and I'm wondering if it's helped. Do you see lower insurance prices? Do you see easier insurance? Are they responding to that?
Yes and no. We renew every February, and we have a master policy. So everything we're insuring, we're taking our entire portfolio to the market all at once, right? And our property rates went down in February. And I can tell you it's because we spent a good 6 months, okay, filling out a schedule of values for every one of the properties that we own in all those states I mentioned, okay? And I can't tell you how many columns we had, identifying the building materials, whatever it was, the metrics that are important to the insurance industry. And people noticed. Okay, people noticed what we did. So we have a very strong in-house protocol about mitigating insurance risk. Liability insurance went up. So it's not just about property, it's about crime. Okay? Insurers look at the crime statistics. It's hit us hard in the urban markets. You wouldn't believe some of the liability policy, and that's all about litigation. You know, people do get harmed legitimately, but many people do not. Okay, and you just send it over to the insurance company, right? And they figure it out. So I guess that's a long-winded response. Yeah. May I ask you a question? Yeah. Because you got a little bit shortchanged at the end, and I'm curious. I think Asia's Lighthouse Project is a really good community scale solution. Can you have a couple others that you could share with the audience?
Yeah, thanks. Part of the sort of, I guess, ethos behind the book is that when you put the needs of older adults kind of at the center for our climate adaptation challenge, it galvanizes solutions that really benefit everyone. So older adults are maybe your organizing principle, but the benefits you're delivering are really benefits that accrue to everyone, like the Community Lighthouse example. So I'll mention another one. There were 3 case studies in the book, one of which was New Orleans. But I'll talk a little bit about Portland, Oregon, which I think really drew on their experience from COVID. Portland, Oregon, 20 years ago, committed to be an age-friendly community, meaning they were kind of committed to the idea of becoming a place where older people, as they age, could age well, could have vibrant lives as over the course of the lifespan. That expanded eventually to the county as well. And that commitment to being age-friendly community allowed them to bring a lot of different stakeholders to the table in kind of an organizing way to deal with lots of different things, housing and transportation, public spaces, and much more. When it came to COVID, it allowed them to really get resources to people in ways that they needed through trusted messengers. So they kind of established very quickly, they already had a sense of who the older adults were, where they lived, not unlike the Project Lighthouse example. They had done that pre-work. They understood older adults' needs. When COVID hit, they were able to sort of quickly deploy COVID response through those trusted messengers to get older adults the support they needed during COVID. When the heat waves hit the region in 2021, where older adults were massively impacted, something like 1,000 people died in the region, the average age was 67. They used that same framework to get out portable heat pumps, to get air conditioners into homes, and they prioritized the needs of particularly low-income older adults who they knew were at greatest risk because they'd already done that pre-work. They already had that kind of diverse stakeholder table set, and they had those trusted messengers who older adults knew they could trust, who were advocating for their needs and their interests, and were willing to open the door to let that installer come in and plug in the new system.
That's incredible. So I would like anyone who'd like to talk about how important it is for a partnership at every level, the local level, the community organizations. I know we're seeing some illustration, but honestly, we need everybody, and we can't ever just pluck out housing as if it sits alone, right? It's the people that need housing also need everything else, right? And that means all of us. And what I like about thinking through this as an aging population is that we all intend to be there, right? And so this is everybody's goal. And so it is important for us to think about this. That number will continue to go higher and higher as it is all of our intention to be there. So any thoughts on partnership, the need for everybody to be at the table and to be a part of the solution?
Yeah, I think particularly for the Community Lighthouse Project, that plays perfectly into that because it is a leader, resident, local-based initiative, but like I said earlier, it doesn't exist in a bubble. So there have been times where, we have gone to philanthropic sources and government sources to be a part of this project. So I know earlier I said, the leaders were thinking like, when are they going to do this and when are they going to do that? But it's not a they who's the enemy here. It's how can we leverage the power we have as a community to work with positions in power and leadership. So a lot of the Community Lighthouse Project is funded philanthropically, but also through local and federal government sources. So the city of New Orleans put towards $2 million for the initial projects. Congressman Troy Carter earmarked $3.8 million for the projects. And it's not, we did this on our own. We picked ourselves up by the bootstraps. It's each sector of government and local authority plays a part in this, and it comes down to residents being a part of their community lighthouse team up into, the city council and the mayor and the congressman and so on, taking ownership of the project and really seeing the vision behind it.
I saw in your, Kathy, in the line items that you had for your budget, there was a $2 million on one of them, like $2 million came from philanthropy. So important, there's a space in that to solve some of these issues.
I mean, you saw the capital stacks. It's just, you can't do it without partners. Now I'm talking about financial partners, right? And it's public, it's nonprofit, it's ourselves, right? We go to great lengths, and this is not unique to us. This is anybody that's working in this industry right now. This is how you get these things done. We're kind of chasing our tails, right? Because we want to build better, the cost goes up, it means you have to raise more money, right? Your insurance premiums, people need to understand the work that we do, we can't raise rents. We're restricted. Right? So when that insurance bill comes in, we can't say, okay, your rents are going up 5%, right? We got to pay the insurance bill. If you're finishing your venture and you're trying to stabilize, means you're trying to get to a fully occupied building so you can convert to all your permanent loan sources. Well, guess what they look at? They look at not only the revenue you're coming from your venture, but your expenses. If your insurance premium is now 25, 35, 45% higher than you thought, guess what happens? Your perm debt goes down, right? So this is not sustainable, people, and it's particularly harmful to the investments we've made in all the units we built since Katrina, because that's about preservation. Those transactions are already built. People are living in them, and they're getting these extraordinary insurance premiums, and there is no relief. So what do you expect those owners to do? They're going to walk away. Okay? If they have the gumption to stick it out, you're going to end up with deteriorating properties because they simply can't maintain them. So, we really have to understand, and I guess where I sit in this, we all have to be partners and forget about government coming up with a quick term solution. It's the people in this room. We have to do what Asia's doing, what everybody else is doing, and to the extent, help yourselves, help your neighbors.
That's excellent. Go ahead.
I would just say, Kathy, we say the exact same thing. We see the exact same thing with our portfolio. We have about 4,000 units. We're seeing the exact same thing in terms of the challenges, not the insurance challenge being as high in the Mid-Atlantic as it is here, but it's getting there. And it is a systemic problem when it comes to housing affordability and housing stability. With regards to partners, one of the things I talk about when I talk about the book to audiences is there really is a role for everyone, because this problem that we're trying to solve of how you reduce risks for older adults in the face of a changing climate is not a job that any one sector can solve. It's not just the emergency manager's job to solve. It's not just the area agency on aging's job to solve. Far from it. It really does take all of us. Utilities, for example, can encourage more energy efficiency in homes and think about different payment plans for older adults. Housing planners, transportation planners can push for that zoning reform that is going to deliver smaller, more energy efficient, more compact, more socially connected homes that are going to reduce risk. Asia talked about the isolation risk for older adults. 30% of older adults live by themselves. And if we're not creating communities where they can sort of interact with one another, that risk is going to increase. And then you think about transportation, again, one of the data points up there, 1 in 5 older adults doesn't drive. So making sure that we have transportation systems in place that actually allow people to remain independent, to get access to help when they need it, whether it's a time of duress or whether it's a daily needs kind of situation. Again, it's all sectors that need to be a part of this solution.
I appreciate that. And for the planners in the room, like what you're talking about is human-centered design, like thinking about all sectors of people, putting them at the center of all the things that we're thinking about and making that our North Star, making things better for people. We have some time, if anybody has a question from the audience that you might like to ask one of our panelists, we have a little bit more time to do that. Gentleman in the back, I think someone has a microphone. There it is.
I have 2 questions. First one, I'm going to just ask both of them and then let y'all talk. Caroline, from the insurance perspective, I understand you're talking about the resiliency building and not building too close to the coast or to sensitive areas, but in Louisiana, the insurance problem is much bigger, right? It's not just building south of I-10, it's also if you're building something in rural areas of Louisiana, north of I-10, where you can't get insurance because of either it's volunteer fire departments only, or the insurance providers just aren't writing new coverages. So what at the state level would need to be done, to bring in more insurance companies or help subsidize that issue? Other questions completely separate, geared to Danielle and Kathy. I've worked, I'm on the site design side, right? Civil, environmental design. Done a lot of work over the last 15 years on attainable housing projects. And I'd say at least 6 of those projects have died at the end, fully designed. The developers, you guys are followed all the protocols, gone through the housing authorities, have the state support, housing authority support, somewhat, local support. And when you get to the finish line, local politicians at the municipal level find a way to derail it. What's the best method, I guess, in educating these councilmen or parish what are they? Police? What's that? Alderman. Police jurors, thank you. Police jurors to help us, get over that last hurdle, because a lot of our clients, you guys, the developers, aren't always local, so they're relying on the local people to assist with those. Thanks.
We have no softball questions here. So do you want to get started?
You want me to start? Sure. Thanks for the question. It's an important and difficult one. The first thing to say is it's not just location choice, it's how we build those structures. And as you saw, there are ways to build that can withstand really high winds and can withstand and be there after a really severe storm. And getting the building stock to that level is going to be a challenge. It's the building codes for new construction, right? But then it's also how do we turn over existing buildings that were not built to those standards or built for future risk. And it's also thinking about those construction decisions for how long buildings last and how our risks are going to be changing over the next several decades, and making sure we're addressing those today. And to come back to the way our brains work, we're not really good at thinking about risk in general, and we're really bad at thinking about changing risk, that our environment today is not going to be like our environment in 30 years, but our structures might still be here. So I think all of that makes it really tricky. And to see another challenge is how to get the risk reduction measures actually incorporated into insurance. So it was encouraging to me to hear that you did see some benefits from that. We've been hearing elsewhere that a lot of the models that insurance companies use for their underwriting decisions, so do they offer you insurance at all, and then how much do they charge, are not doing a really good job at capturing a lot of risk reduction benefits, and it's for a number of reasons. Some types of community risk reduction measures are just not, like nature-based solutions are not captured really well in the models, but other things, it's really hard for them to get the data. And so if they don't have a cheap, easy, fast way to know that's a fortified house, you should get the discount, or what the fire department is actually operating at a higher standard, they just assume everything's really, really risky. And so there's now some new startups and other approaches to try to collect those important risk variables that have to do with the community and the regulations and whether they're enforced, but also the nature of the structure, and get it into insurance models so that it can be transparent in the market. And I don't think we're quite there yet, but that would help. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is some of these challenges, as you've heard with insurance, are really unsustainable, and it's going to be hard to think how we have any relief in the near term with the tools we have. And so there's conversations arising about new roles for the public sector to play in helping provide some relief. So for example, other countries have an approach where the government backstops the losses for very severe catastrophes, and in exchange, insurance companies have to provide full and complete coverage for all perils in their standard policy. So is there a model like that that could help make insurance available and cheaper more widely and faster?
Thank you so much. Kathy, did you want to answer this question, and then we'll let you, Danielle, end up? Yeah.
About NIMBYism? Okay. I don't know what to tell you on that one. Education's important, upfront communication, the neighborhoods, political leaders, but I can guarantee you can do all that, and last minute something comes up to bite you. So, what can you do? You can continue to fight to get the venture done, to continue to communicate. You can take people to see real examples of transactions that are completed. They're lovely, right? So they can see, they're affordable housing, people see things when you say those words, and they're not always positive. So you have to give them a different vision, right? And then just sometimes you're not going to win, right? And you have choices then. You either move, you find a different site, or you sue them. So those are your choices.
Thank you.
I don't really have anything to add to that. I mean, she's on the front lines. I will say this. I mean, I think I'll don my AARP hat again after being there for a few years. One of the ways that AARP promulgates or engages in this conversation around housing is really by sort of offering this notion of choice. How is it that we can create a community that's going to work for all of our people over the course of their lifespan? And how do we ensure that there's the right kind of housing options that will exist for them then and that will exist for folks now? I will say in my own, home county of Arlington, where I live in Virginia, we just battled this missing middle zoning debate, and all the good things were said, all the right data was presented, all the right information was. Lots of people showed up to advocate for the zoning change and support it, and the local leaders came through and they did it. And gosh be darn, now we've got neighbors who are suing the county because they don't like it. So, it does go back to education, engagement, having a vision for the kind of community you want to be, and then trying to nest that project within that larger vision.
I appreciate you saying that. Sometimes we think that my community, the one that, I live in, can be set apart from the rest of the community. And the truth is that we're all connected. Yeah. And if we continue to be in that space, we're going to continue to lose the battle. So there is some thought of winning over those people, all people, to a mindset of recognizing the value in every human in our state. And when we do that, we're going to be in a better space. We're going to make decisions differently, and we're going to see just that space where all of us have opportunities to grow. I would like to give you each one little statement to say as we wrap up, and then at the end of that, we would ask our audience to thank you for all that you've done. So won't we go ahead and get started with you?
I'll just underscore, that this idea that older adults are the fastest growing part of our demographic, really. And the communities we're planning for today are not going to be the same communities that we live in 10 or 20 years from now, not only because the climate risks are going to look different, but because our population will be older. So let's be honest about those needs. Let's educate ourselves about the conditions that older adults are confronted with, and let's use that as the basis for intersecting with our climate risks. Thank you.
I'm not sure much more I can add, other than I really believe this. You just have to invest in your own property, help your neighbors when you can, and continue to advocate. We advocate at the state level, we advocate at the federal level, but we as a state, we've got to be able to fight the good fight and withstand this, because these are not going to change overnight. This will not change overnight.
Something I want to highlight from the neuro plenary was stuff doesn't make people happy, it's relationships. And I think that's what this project is about. It's about building and connecting those relationships and creating something out of it. So it can't be understated how important community is. Community not only saves lives, but it makes us happy.
Like what everyone said, I'll kind of combine some of these statements, which is that we have to face the risk head on too and acknowledge the changing risk environment we're in. And if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to solve the problems. But that when we all come together and work together in partnership, we can create thriving communities. So.
Well, thank you for helping us live on the edge today. Thank you so much for coming here today. Please help me in thanking our panelists. Excellent, excellent job. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I just want to let you know we have a 15-minute break, and please come back here at 3:45. We have a very special treat for you. We'll have some cultural, and Commissioner Darden, or ex-Commissioner Darden, is going to explain to us why Louisiana ain't Mississippi. And then afterwards, I really hope that you all have your schedules cleared and that you can stay until 7 p.m. tonight, because, yeah, we've got lots of fun, exciting, and thought-provoking things in store for you. So we'll see you back in 15 minutes.
Great summit. Thank you.